Welcome to Revelations, the place where we speak truth to power. I am Cole Johnson, and I am so glad you're able to join us. How can I introduce this next guest? Podcaster, public speaker, and CEO. Well, that's how she describes herself. An entrepreneur and a self-professed nerd also describes her. This proudly black, mixed, and nerdy lady is ready to show us all that we are not a monolith. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the founder and CEO of ManeHustle Media, Sharmane Fury. And this is her revelation. Well, how are you doing?
Hello.
It's been a minute since I have talked to you, friend. It's great to see you and hear from you again.
Nice to see you too. Thank you for inviting me to your show.
Well, thank you for taking up the invitation. Before I even get started on the main portion of this interview, I just I feel for you because you were where my original hometown is, and I know it is cooking up a storm out
It's
there.
hot. And I don't have my Uncle Rag near me, so I'm just going to be, patting every so often.
Look, that's quite all right. I totally understand. I totally understand it. All right. So, what we normally do in this, since you're on the first time here, we like to do what we call open the way. I learned as I came along, the conversations start when vulnerability enters the room. So this is normally the spot where we try to open up that vulnerability. So I know Texas is where your roots are. Is it Houston where your roots are? Is it somewhere else in the state?
Well, no. So, I was born in California.
That's right.
Yeah, I was born in Sacramento, but I moved around a lot because I got a military family. But my black side of my family, my ancestral origins are Galveston enslaved. Became generally southeastern Texas, and then my great grandmother popped on a wagon and got herself over to California because my great grandfather was a horse thief / train porter.
No.
And he made his way to California after almost getting caught stealing horses. And so she was like, I got all these kids. I guess I'll meet you there.
Oh, no.
So that's how I became a California mixed black, I guess. So my family ended up in Riverside, and then all my family is military. So I moved around a bunch. So I claim Long Beach as my hometown because that's when I woke up, 11 to 15 years old, kind of that personality forming time.
Right.
So I rep for Long Beach, the 213, but now I live in the 713.
How convenient. And all this time, I've known the area code of LA. Never dawned on me it was that way.
Well, so 213 is like old Long Beach, like when I was growing up. So now I don't know what they are, but it's not not everybody has 213. I still have my 213 number, and I'm holding on for dear life to it because I'm always representing. But yeah, so I'm from the 213.
See, all right,
West Side.
Well, see, I come from Houston. I don't live there now, but I hold on to the number as tight as possible still. So I know how that is.
Yep.
All right. So you have this is interesting. So you have California and Texas roots before you were even born. Now I like that. Okay. So when we got to know each other, we talked about this holiday that people didn't know about, and it was called Juneteenth. Well, all of a sudden people know about it now.
It's stressing me out too.
All right. So And I wanted to ask you this as soon as I remembered it.
Mm.
So, how did you receive Juneteenth becoming a federal holiday when not even like the year before it wasn't even on people's radar?
Yeah, you know what? It was one of those things where I think I thought I wanted people to know about it until people knew about it, and it was like, je regret. Like, I
Yes.
instantly regretted that people learned about it. So for me, like I said, my family is ancestral roots are from here, so like it was a big deal. Our family descends from enslaved people that passed to the Galveston port. So
Right.
like for us, we
Hmm.
held it, and I
Yeah.
was one of the few kids growing up in California that like knew about it. I was the kid telling other black kids like, wait, you don't know about Emancipation Day? Like
Right.
um and I'm mixed, I'm black Japanese and a little bit British too. And so it was weird to be like the pale one telling everybody like, yo, we have this holiday that acknowledges emancipation. And so the red foods, the whole thing, like this was always something my family celebrated. And I started doing Juneteenth episodes for my show because I wanted, like I said, I thought I wanted people to know about it. And when I heard that people were trying to push it for a federally recognized holiday, I think initially I was like, yeah, let's do it, because I wanted black people to have the day off.
Right.
But once I realized who was pushing for it, I was like, no, I don't want this. I don't want this. I don't want this. And now I definitely don't want this because it is not the freedom for me.
Right.
I do not want corporations capitalizing on our struggles
Hmm.
or our history. And even though like Walmart took a big hit on social media about it, they're still pushing out materials that aren't Juneteenth related now. But it's like the struggle is real candles and what's the tea and stuff like that, like on candles and shit like that. And I'm just like,
Hmm.
no, 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 no. I regret I regret that the rest of the world found out
Oh
about
gosh.
Juneteenth.
The dangers of when something gets co-opted. Yeah,
And it's a
yeah.
problematic thing to say, and I've said it multiple times, and I know that it's terrible that I said it, but there's aspects of segregation that I kind of wish we were able to hold,
Mm.
like that our neighborhoods were able to stay where we can have black doctors, black
Yeah.
dentists, like
Hmm.
things like that, whatever. And this holiday is kind of one of those things too, where it's just like it needed to be for us. A
Mm.
couple years ago, I started to tell my boss is when I had, when I was working for other people, I'd be like, I'm a descendant of Galveston enslaved.
Right.
This day is very special to my family. I'm taking the day off. I'm asking
Mm.
for you to pay me for it. And I'm asking for you to also let all the other black people on staff know that they have that free day off. The first year I got the day off, and I don't believe the rest of the black folks or mixed black folks, which at the time we had 11,
Mm.
got it or were told. And then I started telling people, I was like, this is what I did last year. And so collectively, a few of us talked about it, and they ended up making it an option for people to take off paid. And
Mm.
this was a year before or 2 years before it became federally recognized. So,
Right.
yikes. I mean, I don't know. I have feelings.
And I figured you would, because when I put this question in here, I was like, okay, I know I'm gonna get a really good, profound answer from you on this one, because I have a lot of similar feelings about that too. Yeah, and I'm glad you actually said that, because the one thing I've noticed about you, and it's not just by profession, it just simply is who you are. Blackness seems to be a huge thing for you.
It's my
So,
primary identity. Yeah.
right. So, where do you think, other than, of course, you lived the experience, obviously, did you get such a profound love of the culture?
Well, so I am black Japanese mixed, but I
Right.
always would describe myself as weekend Japanese because I wasn't able to like exist as a Japanese person or even a Japanese mixed person. I mean,
Mhm.
culturally, Japanese aren't for mixing. Like
Right.
just by nature of me being born in America and mixed, I'm already not Japanese to Japanese people because they have a very nationalistic view. You're Japanese if you're
Right.
from Japan.
Right.
That being said, they have their own experiences of prejudice and racism as well. in country. But here I'm removed from Japanese status because I was born in America. And then on top of that, I'm second generation American born and I'm mixed race. So, you know, there's extra things. So I got to be Japanese in my grandma's home exclusively. I couldn't go, like when we went to other Japanese events and stuff like that, I wasn't there as my grandmother's granddaughter. I was there sometimes if we ran into people she knew as the child of a friend of hers or something like that, because she was nervous that people would figure out that we were Black. I was darker when I was little, but I still I'm not identifiable as Black to non-Black people. You know, I'm not white, that's for sure.
Right.
I'm not Asian even, you know. People don't view me as Asian. I'm really racially ambiguous in my presentation. So that's why I don't have the same level of connection to being a Japanese. Like I don't have a lived Japanese experience, I guess is what I want to say. I have a weekend in my grandma's home Japanese experience. Whereas every aspect of my life was Black. I lived in Black neighborhoods. My dad's Black. The church I grew up in was Black. The elementary schools I went through were predominantly Black and Mexican. So for me, it's not that I learned the love of the culture. I am the culture. I'm part of the culture, you know, and especially, and which is different in California, like the way you experience a mixed Black person who presents like me versus the way you experience a mixed Black person that presents like me here in the South. In the South, I'm Black.
Right.
I don't have to answer too many questions. And if I do have to answer a question, the question is not what are you? It's what are you mixed with? So Black people are already telling me, I know you're Black, but what's the other thing? Where in California or anywhere else that I go, it's what are you? And so except for with Black folks. And so I get to exist. I don't even like that I said it that way, but whatever, it's language. I get to exist as a mixed Black person with a Black identity with very little questioning. More often than not, my Blackness is questioned by white people. So for me, I am the culture. I'm from the culture. It's my culture, and I love us, you know.
Why does that not? Well, that is wonderful that you are that way, but why does that not surprise me that I've heard that about how white people just treat? Never mind. I can go on a tangent with that. Well, you have sufficiently opened the way, and I think we have to continue on with this conversation.
Okay, let's do it.
The CEO of Hustle Maine Incorporated, Sharmane Fury, is joining me on Revelations, and she just opened the way, and I think now it's time we go on that bridge to prosperity. Now, here is where we try to link childhood lessons to adult application. So you mentioned your West Coast roots, and you mentioned a little bit culturally how things are. So I met you when you were living out there. So what as an adult made you stay out there?
Well, I move around a lot. So I think linked to the fact that I was a military kid, every 4 or 5 years, I get this itch to move. And so as an adult, when I was 27, I left California. I went from California to Austin. I was here for about 5.5 years, and I went from Austin to Massachusetts to Boston. I was out there for about 6 winters. I was there for 6 winters. You only count that in winters. And then I was like, I'm done with winter. So I wanted to go back home to California. And so we went back to LA, and we were there for 5.5 years as well. And I probably could have stayed there, but I got to a point where I wasn't thriving quite the way I wanted to. And the opportunity presented itself for me to come back to Texas and open a comic book shop with a friend of mine from business school. And so that's why I did that. And so between every 4 years, I get the itch. Every 5.5 years is when I actually move, usually. So what kept me in what got me back to California, I guess, was just like I finally got homesick and needed to have some adult time in LA. And I did that bit. And then, like I said, I wasn't thriving quite the way I wanted to. I was doing well, but there was a lot of things that happened. I was working in HR and tech field, but that wasn't my chosen, path. That just was the path that I ended up on. And had some difficulties with that career that made me feel like I never want to work for other people again. And then I just decided, you know what, it's time to let my nerd flag fly and take some risks and do this other thing. And so that's how I ended up in Houston. So, and now I'm here in Houston. I did come here to open my comic book shop. I have since left my shop and transferred my co-ownership over to my business partner because different opportunities presented itself once I got here. Like in terms of what I was lacking in thriving in California, hit way too quickly here when I got to Houston. Things opened wide up and I was able to change my path again within the first 8 months of living here.
Yeah, we might have to talk about how and what opportunities did present itself once you got there. All right, so if you had to take something from LA, what would that be?
I don't know. LA is a weird place. It's home. It's my home terra, I guess. But it's not it's one of those things. It's like it's the racism I know. It's the sunshine I know. It's the weather I know. It's there's so many different aspects about it that it's like once you move to different places, you start to be like, ooh, I don't like this, or this doesn't feel comfortable or whatever, or I don't know how to maneuver this. So like maneuvering racism in Massachusetts, I hate it. I absolutely hate. I mean, obviously you hate maneuvering racism anywhere, but Boston in particular is one of the most racist places I've ever existed in. And I could not wait to get out of there. No more time in the deep north if I can avoid it. And so I wanted to come back home because I didn't want to deal with what they were like, so my California thing is just like the second I touch down, I realize I feel at home when I hit LA, and I don't know why specifically, but it just is the spot. It's where I've laughed the most. I love comedy, and I spent a lot of time in the comedy, clubs and stuff like that as an attendee. One time as a stand-up, and I laughed the most there. I've produced some films there. I've made some connections there that it just feels like home when I'm there.
Yeah, and to your point of Boston, my father, I think I was 12 when he actually said this. He said, "Yeah, I've been many different places. Boston to me is the most racist city I've ever been in." I was like, "Wow."
They segregate their white people, so
yeah.
I mean, they got their Irish, their English, and their Italians all in different communities in a way that's way different than New York, where New York, it doesn't feel like the racial communities are segregated.
Right.
It feels like they are, this is where we lived. And when we got here, this is where we lived when we got here. And we're just kind of crossing paths, right? And in Boston, it's, what are you doing here?
Gosh. So it's extremely territorial.
Yeah. Man. And that's why I call it the deep north. It's like whatever the views are about the north being a place of freedom and openness, it wasn't. And Boston is a big part of that history, of that extremely racist history. So they kept it. They held it.
Yeah. Yeah. So you are not the first that has said that to me about Boston.
Yeah.
And wow, it gives me a whole new perspective about the city.
Yeah.
Now I heard that and I'm so glad you mentioned racism in LA. I heard it's prevalent there, but it's described as disguised.
It's disguised, yeah.
Yeah. So in light of a few incidents that came from there, of course, back in the 90s, we had Rodney King and the trial there, and then O.J. Simpson and his trial there. What are your thoughts about that aspect of LA culture?
What I hate the most about people's view of LA is that, like, oh, you're so lucky you don't have to deal with the racism and stuff like that in Cali. Like the amount of people who have said this, it makes me laugh every time. And I'm like, do you not understand the history of the LAPD? The LAPD was created by transporting KKK members from the South to California for the purpose of policing the influx of Black and brown communities that had started springing up. California has an extremely, or LA in particular, has an extremely racist history, down to the Chinese massacre that a lot of people don't know much about, to like the ways in which they segregated Black and brown communities as well, how they move people around and things like that. And then of course we have literal KKK members are the founding members of the establishment of LAPD. So racism has never not been on the agenda for them, and continues on into the time that I was growing up. There was when Daryl Gates was the chief of police during Rodney King and all that other kind of stuff. So I got to experience, and the Vikings were an police force gang. They all had tattoos of the Viking logo from the Minnesota Vikings. Then they were tasked to basically just go in there and harass Black and brown communities, and in some cases, kill folks and beat up folks. That extended into Long Beach, where I was growing up at the time, and so the disguising of it is, it's Hollywood, it's liberal, even our rich people are cool. But no, all the same things that are happening in other places are happening in LA. It's just that you're distracted by the glitz and glamour of different aspects of that city. But you can drive into any of the predominantly Black and brown communities of LA, and you can see the same level of degradation and oppression that happens anywhere else in the country. So I really don't like that people don't realize when they're outside of LA how terrible LA can be. That being said, it's like one of those things, you're familiar with what you grow up with. So that's my terrible. Right. When I come to a different place and I live in a different place and I learn that local place is terrible, I still don't feel like I fit, because it's a different type of experiences that I have.
Wow.
So yeah, LA has a terrible racist history, even down to how we got water. And like who they had to move around to get the water and stuff like that. Like there's no aspect, in the same way that there's no aspect of the United States history of infrastructure or anything like that doesn't rely on the bodies of Black and brown people. LA is no different.
Yeah.
No different.
Wow. Yeah, and not to mention they held Japanese concentration camps there too. So
yeah, absolutely. The largest Japanese population in the country at the time was there, and still I think I believe has kind of come back a bit. But everybody was moved from there. Whole communities, their stuff was taken away from them, and they were sent to concentration camps. And then when they returned, they didn't have their existence. Their homes, their property was gone too. So yeah, LA has a terrible history. But they like to mask it in this like newfound unity that we have. We're such a diverse place. Blah 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 blah. But it's no different. It's no different than any other.
Oh gosh, I totally understand that. This is how I am in Houston. So I grew up in the 5th Ward, and I am so familiar with that area where, the aspects of it. Yeah, I mean, of course, it bothers me because there are people who are disenfranchised there, obviously. But it's like what you said. It's my kind of, I guess you could say, uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's like the uncomfortable you can kind of be comfortable in because it's familiar. You know?
Right. But if I would, and I have been. If I were to supplant myself in any other area, even in the city, Houston, but if I was to supplant any other area, Houston, that is like the 5th Ward or any area in the country like that, I could, of course, I would understand in terms of, okay, I've lived in a situation like this, so I understand how to maneuver. But yeah, like you said, the familiarity is not quite there, like it would be for me in the 5th Ward in Houston. So I totally get what you mean.
Because I'm here now in the 3rd Ward, and this is where I opened the shop, and I'm like 3 or 4 blocks away from TSU. It's a predominantly Black community, historically Black community. There's landmarkers that show how Black people thrived in the past here. It's being heavily gentrified right now too, so that's that aspect of discomfort. And even I feel like, while it feels familiar to me because it feels not much different than the community I grew up in, just like a Texas version of it with slightly less Mexicans. I also feel like an infiltrator. I do kind of feel to a degree like not a gentrifier, but an infiltrator, in that it's not the community that I grew up in, and I still come here with lighter skin and Japanese style hair, I guess, or textured hair, and so short of people taking a moment to see that I'm a mixed Black person, I do feel like I've somewhat infiltrated a community that I'm not from, even though I grew up in very similar circumstances, very, very similar. But I'm more comfortable here than I feel in other parts of Houston. Now that I've lived here for a year, but same thing. Like, I just feel like, it's not where I grew up. So
yeah. I totally understand that. Totally understand that. Wow. Well, that will conclude British prosperity. And man, I got educated for sure with this one. Man, that was good. Entrepreneur, public speaker, CEO Sharmane Fury is joining me on Revelations. We have opened the way. She's walked across that bridge with me, and now it is time to go behind the purpose. And in Behind the Purpose, this is the reason why we function the way we do. Now, you, ma'am, Sir Auntie Maine, describe yourself as a mixed Black nerd, hence the title of one of your podcasts, BLERDcoMIXed. Now, how is that designation giving you such strength over the course of time? And I know you suffer some difficulty too. How did people also make it difficult for you to live the life of a mixed Black nerd?
I think the way that it empowers me or gives me power is claiming the way I access my nerd, right? Like Black and brown people aren't considered categorically what you think of when you think of geeks and nerds and stuff like that. And I've been a lifelong comic book reader and fan, but I was growing up in a time where Black people couldn't express geek, couldn't express nerd, couldn't express fandoms without some form of ridicule, because like we had, as a community, we had to live up to certain expectations that some of them were placed on us by ourselves. Some of those were placed on us by whiteness. And so I had to hide this aspect of myself and didn't really get to be my full self. But the way that I access any kind of fandom is through my mixed Black lens. Like the way I describe myself, like growing up, I was a Black girl who happened to have a Japanese mom. And then I left and went to the suburbs and lived in a predominantly white community. And that's how I learned I was mixed. That's how I learned people didn't see me as a Black kid, because I was Black and at home. But when I left that community, the other people that existed around me didn't see me as that way. So I was fighting to constantly share, like, I'm Black, like I'm Black. Like, I don't know how else to say that I'm Black. I don't know how to maneuver any other way. Right. So I tell people, like, I was Black until I was about 15, 16, and I moved to a different community, and that's when I became mixed. So the reason why I put forward that I am even identifying as a mixed person is because I know that my face comes with questions. I know that my skin tone comes with questions, my hair texture. And rather than being accused of cultural appropriation or co-opting or anything like that, I'm putting forward, like, I know that you can identify me as Black, but guaranteed. Like, that's why I say this is why I usually say I'm mixed Black versus even saying mixed Black Asian or anything like that. Because I exist in a predominantly Black life. My life is everything that I access through my Black lens, and nerdery is a part of that. So how I read comics, how I got into Star Wars, I'm always viewing things as like a Black kid, a mixed Black kid. And when the term blurred popped up, I mean, that's a mixed bag. There's aspects of like mixing BL along any other word to make it the Black version of that does upset me, because I'm like, that still centers whiteness because we've decided they get to be the main thing. That being said, I love the term blurred. Like that's just specifically, it just means something when you say it. And when you're with other blurs, you all feel the same thing, right? You're just like, we're into this nerdy shit, but we're into it from our Black perspective and the way we access it. There's always a different, you know, I don't want to say like the cliche things, like we add a little bit more flavor to things, but like we do, like there's just a way in which we celebrate different things that hits different than it does when you see a white person do it, or other communities even do it. And like the way that we incorporate ourselves, our culture into whatever thing we're a fan of, that's very specific to blurredness, not to nerdness, you know. So for me, it empowers me because it allows people to get, like, when I say that I'm a blurred, what I'm saying is that I access my nerd and geekery through my Black lens. Now, in the last year or so, I started to more adopt a Blasian identity, or I grew up referring to myself as Blackanese, but then Chris Rock ruined that, or Chris Tucker ruined that by saying it in Rush Hour. And my family already described it that way because knees, like Japanese, are the only ones that have a knees, which is why Black knees worked for Black and Japanese, but then he messed it up. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. I'm not holding a grudge after 20 years from Chris Tucker.
No, I don't sense that grudge at all.
But I started adopting Blasian just because as a community, Black Asians are owning that terminology now. And the thing is that we're separated from the Asian American community too, because there is so much anti-Blackness around the world. And even as Asians are experiencing oppression, they, as a community, they were pushing that same type of oppression on Black Asians. And there are so many of us out there. I mean, right now in music, Blasians are, we're having a moment. So I started to adopt the term Blasian just because I wanted to let people know, like, I get that you don't get what my deal is. When you look at me, I'm yellow brown. I've got Japanese textured hair, and but my name is Sharmane Latrice. You know, like I grew up in Long Beach. I code a certain kind of Black when people meet me and stuff like that. So to alleviate some of the question, to alleviate me having to hear the questions. So it's not like I'm doing it because I want to make it easier for others. I'm doing it because I'm tired of y'all asking me questions, basically. And so that's why I started to call myself the Blasian Blurred, because I started BLERDcoMIXed with my fellow mixed Black blurred, and there's times when it was just like, you know, he's more presentation Black, you know, like physically than I am. And so like there's times when he's not with me on things that I'm just like, I feel like I have to answer questions as to why I've said I'm a co-host of a blurred podcast, you know. So that's why I started to incorporate the Blasian aspect of it. But I get power from the term blurred because it just tells what kind of nerd I am. And then incorporating Blasian into it now actually it does allow me to live a fuller version of my nerdery, because I did grow up with anime. I did grow up with manga. I am a robot freak, you know. Some of the things that are stereotypically Japanese interests, I have those things, and now I can incorporate them because it's becoming more popular in Black culture. Different aspects of Japanese culture and stuff like that too. So I get to kind of own the whole thing by doing that. Where people have taken it away from me is more of the, or attempted to, because you can't take shit away from me.
Of course
where they've attempted to is the thing of just like, I'm a femme-bodied person. So obviously you can't be a nerd because, you know, people with boobs can't understand comics, evidently. You know, the things like that. It's like, you know, first of all, you're a femme, then you're brown, then you're, you know, like there's so many things about you that aren't coding nerd, and that's because they're centering whiteness, and they're centering in particular 18 to 45-year-old white guys. like that's who gets to be, in quotation fingers, who gets to be a nerd. And then you see me, and more often than not, I can go head to head with people's comic book knowledge, and they're just a guy who likes Batman or Superman, and I'm a person who reads all kind of shit. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's so many things, like you're not going um to contend with me in some cases, and
Right.
not, and I don't have nearly as much knowledge as some of our mutual friends, that
Mm-hmm.
we both know in blurred spaces.
Right.
Like they're the people I go to when I don't know something. But when I go into a comic book shop, and it's predominantly, white male clientele there and stuff like that, and the first question is, do you understand that you're in a comic book shop? Like, no, that was really confusing. I don't know how I ended up here. Or, like if I
Wow.
pick up a certain book, it's like, do you understand that this is a part of a series? And that this is like the second book. And I'm like, do you understand that I walked straight to that section, grabbed one book, didn't browse, came to the front because this is all I want. There's so many times in which someone has tried to make me seem like I don't know anything. Or, are you buying this for your boyfriend? Do you know what other books he collects? First of all, assumptions. Like you don't know
Right.
my deal at all. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, like, I'm all the things that tells you I can't possibly be a nerd. I'm a bigendered identity, femme-bodied person.
Mm-hmm.
I am Black and Asian. I am, like I'm also 44. So like people think
Mm-hmm.
you grow out of it. And the thing is, like, comics
No.
aren't really for kids. Like, and
Right.
even when I was reading comics as a kid, most of those I shouldn't have been reading. Like
Mm-hmm.
they've never really been for kids. Well, maybe in the golden age, but like, now they're for older folks and stuff like that. So nothing's diminished it for me, and I
Good.
don't really allow people to take away my power. But that being said, they do attempt it a lot.
Mm. Good. And I'm glad that they can't. Because just in knowing you, that's part of your charm to me.
Mm,
Like the fact that you're proud to be a nerd, and you're proud to be black along with being a nerd, and you wave that flag proudly and high. I'm like, cool.
mm-hmm.
Rocket sis, I want you to do it.
Yeah.
And the fact that the fact you have people who basically call you out on different things, such as, okay, you're female, so you can't do that. You're black, so you can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
You must be doing this for a man. So
Mm-hmm.
and then allude to the fact that you actually might be illiterate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like all
Like,
of
oh,
these
these
things.
boobs are in the way of the
Yeah.
pages. I can't
Yeah.
see them.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah. Yeah.
ridiculous.
I'm sorry, ma'am. I know your breast can't read. So,
it's it's
oh my
so,
gosh.
and it's happened to me like in my own shop. Like when I owned a comic book shop, this guy asked me, like, do you know anything about comics? And I'm like, I'm the owner.
Never at the
Like,
store.
and they're like, yeah, and the guy was like, yeah, no, I get that, but like, have you ever read a comic? And I'm just sitting here just like, and it was a day that my business partner wasn't with me,
uh,
and I'm kind of glad he wasn't,
mm,
because it would have immediately invalidated me, because he probably would have spoke up on my behalf, and which would have been
of course.
kind but unhelpful.
Yeah.
So I was by myself, and I had to run through this thing, and I'm like, listen, sir, you are in my comic book shop that I co-own with a friend. I don't do this by accident. I am a comic book reader. Yes. Have you read a comic before? And then he looks at me like with big eyes, and I'm like, see how uncomfortable, how stupid that question is?
Yes.
I'm not going to assume, if you come into my shop, I'm not going
Mhm.
to assume you don't know anything or that you know everything.
Right.
You enter where you enter, and nobody's
Right.
nerd is too little or too much to claim the title. If
Thank
there's
you.
something you geek hard for, you're a nerd. It's fine, and own
Yes.
it.
Hmm.
I don't ever need to invalidate someone's nerdery just to get me a boost. Like, and that is something that is so,
Oh
it's
my.
really, really typical,
Hmm.
predominantly in men, mostly in white men, but it
Hmm.
happened to me in my own shop with black men too, pretty
Oh,
regularly.
I'm
Not
sure.
regularly, a few times. And
Mm.
eventually I would validate enough, that someone would be like, oh, okay, and that was irritating too, because because it's just like I shouldn't have to prove why I'm in this space.
No.
But you know, it is the reality, and it's a reality I've had to do my entire life, not just as a nerd, but literally as an existing brown person.
Of course.
I've had to do that. And so we can all relate to it in some form. And it's just like, this is the version of it for me, and yeah, so it happens. My favorite one was one of two. It was like once I was wearing a t-shirt that has, it has Black Panther, Captain America, and Iron Man sitting on the Olympic first, second, and third. It's meant to mimic.
Oh yeah, gold, silver, and bronze medals.
Yeah. And so that wasn't the thing the person asked a question about. What they had a question about was if I knew who the characters on my shirt were.
Oh my
and
God.
I was like, do you know who the characters on my shirt are? And he was like, of course. And I'm like, okay. And then he's like trying to almost trying to quiz me. And I'm like, do you know what this shirt is about though? Like, what is the significance of this shirt? And he was like, Captain America's #1. And I was like, no. Because Captain America isn't sitting on the #1, it's not. So it was just like, so this thing of just like, I'm in a movie theater line, and this is the question that I get asked while I'm waiting to go see a movie. I've been asked, I was wearing a Venom t-shirt once, and a kid at Trader Joe's was like, do you know who's on your shirt, or is that just something you gotten like from your boyfriend's closet? And I was like, I host a comic book podcast, bro. Like that was the first thing I said. Like I didn't even need to, but I did. I was like, I host a comic book podcast, bro. And he was like, oh, really? So you know a little bit about comics? And I'm like my instant, like
a little bit, ...
kind of a face. And he was like, I'm going to Comic-Con. I'm so excited. And I was like, oh, did your girlfriend buy you an extra badge? And he just paused because he couldn't comprehend the question that I asked. And he's like, and he does this, and he's like, what? And I was like, did your nerd girlfriend buy you an extra badge when she was buying tickets for herself for Comic-Con? And he goes, what? No. And I'm like, stupid question, huh? And then he just sat there, and I was like, can we finish my transaction, please? Because I'm just at the Trader Joe's trying to fucking get this stupid thing. And I never even went to Trader Joe's. Like there was a one-off that I ever even went to a Trader Joe's in the first place. And for that to happen, I was just like, see, that's why I don't go places like this. But yeah. But yeah, stuff like that happens to me all the time. And so, now as I grow in this world, I'm a former comic book shop owner. I have a comic-based podcast. I am a panelist on Comic Palooza this coming weekend. I am a panelist or a moderator at Colexicon, which is a queer geek women con. I'm going to Dragon Con. I'm going to New York Comic Con. I've been going to Comic Con since I was little. Like it's always been a part of my life. Now I'm Googleable, I guess, in terms of like comic related things. And so if that's the case, next time I'm waiting for the opportunity of someone to try to invalidate me, and I'll be just like, just Google my name. Not because I want to be special, but literally just like, before you ask me dumb questions, open your phone up real fast and Google my name. Tell me how much I know about comic books.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah, ignorance knows no bounds. Oh my gosh, that's just horrible. But hilarious all at the same time.
It also used to happen when I drove a truck. People would ask me if it was my boyfriend's truck and stuff like that, but it was like literally my truck. I just like trucks.
You like driving trucks. Okay.
Yeah, I like to be high. I don't have a truck right now. I can't afford it, but like the amount of times I had to answer questions about driving a truck or reading a comic book, because there's so many pictures on the page. How will I ever comprehend what the context of these?
There is no way a woman can. Oh God.
I'm gonna take a nap and then maybe I'll understand one page.
Oh my gosh. Okay. All right. Let me process the ignorance that you just displayed that other people show you. Oh my gosh, this is ridiculous. All right. So you address ignorance in other ways too. You host a podcast called Militantly Mixed. So how do people approach you if they do know you have a podcast of this nature? considering your boldness in mixing politics, social commentary, and race?
For the most part, Militantly Mixed is a community-based conversational podcast with other mixed people. So I'm mostly only interacted with through mixed people who are trying to find community, who are trying to find representation. Because
Right.
even when you do see mixed people on TV, it's almost always a black, white, biracial, interracial couple that has a more obviously black looking child.
Right.
There's colorism at play and things like that, and people just tend not to see themselves or not see the reality of what it's like to exist as a mixed person on the screen. And so where Militantly Mixed comes in, these are people that are usually just trying to hear something that sounds like what they experienced, and so I mostly have these really positive experiences about it because people are trying to find it. Now, when white people find me, I get two different kinds of reactions. I get the quote unquote woke white person who's really trying to learn,
Oh no.
and in doing so will make mistakes that they need to tell me about. And then that ends up being, well, like in the past when I first started, it ended up being this free labor teaching moment where I'd be like, no, don't do that, and here's why. Where now I'll just be like, this is a podcast that you're welcome to listen to and learn from. It's not a podcast in which you are invited to engage on, because this is for the people I'm making it for. Full stop. Once I started doing that, which was a really bold thing because for a period of time, a big part of my audience were white women who had mixed children. I needed them to understand that like what they were learning by listening to my show was what their children were going to experience, and they were never going to fully understand what those children was going to experience. So they had to do their job to try to make sure that they embrace whatever that child was going through so that they could help maneuver them through those spaces. The other kind of white person I get is the person who doesn't understand what the word militant means. Right. In terms of racial militancy, and will say like, your show sounds so nice and kind. It's not very militant. And I'll be like, obviously you've done your research on racial militancy. Because racial militancy is service to our community. That is the foundation of being a racial militant person, is to service our community. Like the Black Panthers, they created food programs and backpack programs and walking people home from dangerous situations programs. They started to protect their neighborhoods. And yes, they did do that with guns and things like that, but they were being responsive to in kind to what they were experiencing. When they started to become criminalized for protecting their community and their PR changed, that's what people are expecting when they hear Militantly Mixed. And so I will get the type of person that will say like, oh, I heard about your shows, and they're usually like in the podcasting business in some way, shape, or form, and they'll check it out because they want to engage on something, and they'll be like, yeah, I'm not picking up militancy. And I was like, well, why don't you look up what racial militancy is and come back to me, because I'm not doing the work anymore. I'm not going to do the work for white people anymore. It is, if you want to do business with me, you can't come to me incorrect with what you understand racial militancy to be. And so for me, Militantly Mixed is a service to my mixed race community. It's providing a space where they can hear conversations from regular ass mixed people, for us, by us, about us, sharing our experiences, so that they can hear that they're not alone. And that is the predominant thing, is that when I hear people reach out to me because they heard the show, it's, I didn't know I wasn't the only person that experienced this. And sometimes it matters what your mix is if it relates to somebody else's mix. And sometimes it's like an Iranian Filipino experiences the same thing that a black, white, biracial American does. There's so much parallel. There is a lot of differences, but there's so much parallel that as a community, we've been able to grow through the show in just understanding, the experiences that we generally have as mixed people. So that's Militantly Mixed. And then I have 11 billion others.
I am glad you touched on that point, and because I've always, well, of course, always white people, I've always fought them on militancy in what they believe and militancy in what it actually is. And I would always use the Black Panthers as an example because it's like, okay, they did something militant in terms of they serviced their community.
Yeah.
They decided to open up a breakfast program for children before they went to school. They would host free breakfast for them.
Yeah.
That was a militant idea.
To imagine that you are being radical in taking care is still to this day beyond me. Like the way in which that continues to surprise me. I can be just driving down the road and being like, breakfast program. It's radical. Like, how is that radical? Like, how is us taking care of our community radical? And yet it is viewed that way. And for me, I do describe myself as a Black militant, even though I'm a mixed Black person. I do prioritize Blackness before even my own Japanese identity or my mixed race identity. I am mixed, but I'm Black. Full stop. Like, that is how I feel about my identity and about my people. And since I do understand that Black people, specifically here in America, but all over the world, are oppressed and disenfranchised at different levels of other people, that's where my efforts tend to go. I became Militantly Mixed podcast host and public speaker about mixed race identity because I started this podcast, but at the heart of everything I do, it's Blackness first. So for me, like you take that or leave it if you're entering. I'm the first mixed race podcast that lasted beyond 12 episodes. There was shows that existed before me, but they tapped out after 6 to 12 episodes. And by the time I started my show, there hadn't been another mixed race podcast active in over a year. So I am the first one technically that is active today in this run of like this new mixed race podcast and openly talking about mixed race identity thing. I'm the beginning of that, and I take that responsibility very seriously, but I never hide from the fact that at the end of the day, most of my motivation comes from uplifting and preserving and protecting Blackness.
Yeah. And I believe that is why I connect with you so deeply, because of that right there. Man. Well, you want to know what was behind her purpose? There you go. You got it right there. I appreciate that. Entrepreneur, public speaker, podcaster, podcast producer. And I don't know how many other titles I can give you. Sharmane Fury is joining me here on Revelations. I'm enjoying this conversation. She's opened the way. She's walked across that bridge. She has given you the purpose of what she does. And now it's time to bring it all to light. Now, all of us shine in a unique way, and this is how she particularly shines. Now, amongst, like you said, and this came out of your mouth, not mine, you have many different platforms podcast-wise. Here's another one. So you host another one called BiFurious. So I think I have an understanding as to why, but just to have you explain it. Why the title and why the feeling of furious?
I'm an angry bisexual. My last name is Fury.
And she says this with a laugh.
Yeah, so BiFurious was what I was doing with Militantly Mixed. I was missing in my queerness. I am a bisexual, polyamorous identified person. And while I have been married to a cisgendered, heterosexual, mixed Arabic and white man for the last 22 years, I am am bisexual. Like I said, I'm also polyamorous, so I do have relationships separate from my marriage or my primary relationship. And the way in which people treat bisexuals is this: we're either a unicorn, a dragon, or we don't exist. Like
Oh,
we're either mythical or we're an illusion. And bisexuality is always viewed as being sort of like a gateway to deciding if you're going to be queer.
mhm.
Um, where like my whole life, I chased boys and girls. Like even in hindsight, I can see when I was holding little Sarah's hand in first grade, I was holding little Sarah's hand. Like I was interested in her in the same way that I might be interested in a little boy too. And the amount of times that my bisexuality gets invalidated because I happen to have partnered with a man. I mean, first of all, I fell in love when I was 22 with a friend that I had for 7 years.
Yeah.
I, I mean, that if I was going to be monogamous, that was going to block me from like experiencing my full sexual orientation, my full sexual desires, and things like that. Um, and and that's something that happens to a lot of bisexual people because they are monogamous, and they end up picking one, and then they end up having an identity that's associated with that. And for me, when people would view me as straight, I would always like the idea of being viewed as a straight person really upset me. I didn't want that to happen. And then people will be like, well, like, yeah, okay, so you're bisexual, but you're with a man, that thing. That over years made me very angry about how invalidated bisexual people or anybody that's on a omni kind of like line, like
Mhm.
if you're gay and you're male identified and you're attracted to male identified, that's one thing. If you're lesbian and you're woman identified, you're attracted to a woman, you're that. If you're heterosexual, opposite gender, whatever, boom, fine. Everybody can make sense of that. But the idea that you can even remotely be attracted to and pursue relationships with people of different genders, I don't know why it still remains so confusing for people. And yet so many of our major queer like leaders in the past were bisexual, but they were viewed as either straight or gay, depending on what they were viewed or who they partnered with. I guess.
Mhm.
And so there's so much more of us than there are other members of the gay community or the LGBTQ community or the queer community. So that there's like an anger there in being
Yeah.
invalidated. And with BiFurious, it is half a play on words because bisexual, BiFurious, but also I am an angry bisexual. I do view myself that way. And then yeah, my name. So
Mhm.
it all works really well together. And what I
Yeah.
wanted to do with that show, which I struggled with it more than I do with Militantly Mixed, is finding a pathway from the POC perspective of
Mm.
queerness. To discuss the issues that we experience. And while the show itself doesn't necessarily have to be all bisexual content, it's not. It's queerness in general.
Mhm.
I am being, my shows are named after me basically.
Of
So
course.
I am Militantly Mixed. My show is
Mhm.
called Militantly Mixed. I am BiFurious. My show is
Right.
called BiFurious. I am a blurred. I am mixed, which is why we have MIX in the way we spell comics, and it's a comic book show.
Mhm.
I am these things. And so all of my shows are named pretty much after me in some form.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's how that happened.
Yeah. I figured you would have the colorful answer that I thought you would have.
And even like my name of my company, ManeHustle Media,
Right.
MANE, my
Mhm.
name is Sharmane, SHARMANE. So
Mhm.
it's not just that it is my main hustle, MAIN. It
Right.
is me.
I
I'm
mean,
embedded in everything that I do. And so
well,
that's 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 how I name things.
that makes sense. That makes plenty of sense. So, Charmaine Fury. Now, I've known you as another name, but we won't mention that. Charmaine Fury. The first place where my head went when I first saw you mention that name, I wanted to jokingly tease you and say, "All right, so are you a relative of Nick Fury?"
I am the mythical child of Samuel L. Jackson. Um, and I have said this for years. And when um except for the 2 years that I worked on the same show as his actual biological child, and I had to keep my distance because I was so embarrassed about that.
Oh, no.
I when he took on the mantle, the Fury mantle, everything about him in that role clicked into place. Like, it's not just that I'm the mythical child of Samuel L. Jackson. I am the child of Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury.
See, my curiosity almost wants to make me ask you the question. So, how was she, the Samuel Jackson's daughter?
She is him. She is like legit. I I was working on a show and I didn't make the connection, even though I knew the name of his family because I'm a fan. I didn't make the connection, and I had my bad motherfucker wallet. I had Samuel L. Jackson all over my desktop screen. I was wearing T-shirts with his face on all the time. Like, I'm legit a fan. And my boss at the time had said, like, he's laughing and he's like, I cannot wait for you to meet Zoe. And I was like, why are they also into Samuel L. Jackson? And he's like, no, do you not know her? Have you not, you don't know who she is? And I was like, well, I booked her flight, but I haven't met her yet. And then I thought, I was like, oh crap, her last name was Jackson. And I was like, oh no. Because of course a celebrity's child would end up working in TV also.
Right.
And when she walks into the door, like, you didn't have to point her out. Like, she's got his vibe for real. She looks like her mother, but she acts like him. And I instantly just like buttoned everything down. Like, I toned everything down. I stopped telling people that I was his child, because I've been telling people I was his child since high school. I have had a long-standing obsession with Samuel L. Jackson. And and so at one point later in the first season of the show we worked on, I was driving somebody, one of the other people on set had like some need to go pick up a prescription or something like that. And I was a free person. So I was like, yeah, I'll take you. And while we're in the car, the girl goes, do you know who's the person that's like obsessed with Zoe's dad? And it was just so random. Like, we didn't even know each other. We weren't talking. And I started laughing. I was like, oh no. I was like, that's me actually. And she goes, oh, it's you. She's like, I like you. Because at first she was ready to like hate on whoever it was. She's like, no, I like you. You're always, helpful and dope and stuff like that. She's like, what is it? And I was like, I'll tell you the truth. It starts with, he did an interview where he described that he had a childhood stutter. And the way he broke his stutter was every time he felt the compulsion to stutter, he would say motherfucker. That's why he says it. And the fact that trained him out of his stutter, and why he's become famous and synonymous with that, which is also my favorite word, it endeared me to him so much that I instantly was like, that's my dad right there. And I've been saying it, I want to say probably since I was like 14 or 15 years old, and I'm 45 now. So it's crazy the level of obsession that I have. So yeah, that happened. And she's like, well, no, I want to introduce you guys now. And I was like, no. She's like, have you met? I was like, no. I was like, I interact with her, but I never tell her who I am. I do not want to be the person that like becomes her friend and also has an obsession with her dad. Like, I don't want her to feel like I'm meeting her that way. And so I always tried to avoid engaging with her in that respect. But she was funny and she's dope, and she says motherfucker just like he does. And yeah, he's awesome. She's awesome. But yeah, but when he became Fury, it was just like everything about who he was as that character combined so many of my worlds that, yeah, that's how I, what I say is that I gave up my married name and went back to my maiden name.
Oh my gosh. I'm learning so much. All right. Note to self. A curse word is a stutter stopper. Okay.
That's the origin story of why he doesn't stutter.
Wow. Oh boy. Okay.
And is that not just like the most endearing story? Like, I don't know. It just touched my heart. And so, yeah.
I'm glad that it endeared you even more to Samuel L. Jackson. That is awesome.
I love that man.
Oh yeah, I figured, because when I saw you embrace the name Fury, I'm thinking, I mean, as soon I didn't even ask. Okay, well, why did she want to do that? As soon as I saw it, I said, "Avengers."
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm his child.
understand.
It's funny too because someone like the boss that noticed my interest was like, it's funny. He's like, because you could be the mixed child, like sister, like
Mm,
you could he could see it, and he was a white dude from Louisiana, so he's used to
mhm.
like ambiguous black folks that look like me, you know. So when he saw me, he was like, yeah, I could see it. You could be his mixed kid.
Mm.
So I'm owning that.
Oh my, that is awesome. Oh my goodness, that's awesome. All right, so earlier you talked about how since you were a military, well, to say brat just seems so cold
Yeah,
and
it's
callous.
because it's not my fault. You know what I'm saying? It's not my fault that they went in the military.
Right. So
Yeah,
if
I'm
you were,
good.
yeah, since you were a child of military personnel, you went from place to place every
Mm,
3-4 years or so.
mhm,
Uh, and you talked about how you would move to different places when you would feel that your time was up, you'd go somewhere else.
mhm.
So what gave you the itch to move to Houston?
Specifically, the only reason I moved to Houston was because my business partner's from here, and when he reached out to me and said he had an opportunity to start this business, he said he's like, I want to start a comic book shop, but I really only kind of want to start it if you're involved. And he's like, is there any chance you would be willing to join me on this journey? And I was like, absolutely, because I had told him a couple years
Mm,
before that I wanted to open a comic book shop, but I was trying to figure out how it was even going to be feasible for me to do that in LA. Because I'm a hood kid who didn't have a comic book shop, and I always
right.
wanted to have a black comic book shop because I wanted people, and I do say things like people who look like me, and I do mean black people, even though I know that I'm ambiguous in my presentation. But I wanted people who look like me to be able to feel comfortable in a nerd space without being, disenfranchised in some way, shape, or form. And I had told him this like a couple years prior, and I had told him some of my ideas and stuff like that. So when he had the opportunity to work with an association here in the Third Ward of Houston, the Economic Development Council, he reached out and it was like, do you want to do this with me? And I was like, yeah. And so one of the questions was like, this will be long distance, so that might be weird. And I was like, no, I'll just move to Houston. Because it's no question, it's so easy for me, like besides the finance aspect of it, which is the
Right.
most difficult, like I'm game every time. When it's time to jump, I'm ready to jump.
Mhm.
And my partner didn't really enjoy LA and was ready to leave anyway. And while Texas wasn't on our radar again, because we both lived in Texas as kids
Right.
with the military and both as adults together,
Mhm.
we're like, yeah, why not? It's a more affordable too to live out here, and
Right.
ultimately following my passion was the goal. So that's why I ended up in Houston. What's kept me here after leaving the shop
Mhm.
is that it kind of feels like home. Like it doesn't, but it does. And I think that has to do with the fact that I live in the Third Ward, and it's so similar to the neighborhood that I grew up in, Long Beach.
Mhm.
Just like I said, less Mexican, but predominantly Black and Mexican community is what I grew up in. Here, it's predominantly Black, and now gentrified white. But I live 3 blocks away from TSU. I can hear the drum line when they practice every day. Like
Mhm.
being in California, we don't have HBCUs, so and
Right.
I've always been a big drumline, fan, and
Mhm.
to hear it just 3 blocks away, every couple of days and stuff like that, just gives me life here. There's just something about living here that feels somewhat like home. I do want to leave the country, and I have
Mhm.
for years. I've been planning that for years. Originally, that was going to be my next jump in 5 years or so after I
Mhm.
moved here. That may happen sooner since I'm not here at the shop anymore. So there's nothing necessarily tying me to Houston, but I'm comfortable while I'm here in the
Right.
community that I live in.
Right. Yeah. I guess I remember I looked up and I saw that you went from the West Coast to my old stomping grounds. I was like, oh, this looks familiar.
Yeah.
Ah, cool. So you have alluded to it all throughout the show. So I might as well ask you this question. What is Gulf Coast Cosmos?
Gulf Coast Cosmos is the first Black-owned, Blasian-owned at the time, no longer, queer-owned comic book shop in the state of Texas. We are or I have to learn how to speak in past tense. We were, because it still exists. I'm just not a part of it anymore. It's just weird.
Right.
We were the 21st Black-owned comic book shop in the United States.
Wow.
And the mission was simple, to be a space for Black kids and adults and nerds to exist. Honestly, that's what it boils down to, is to exist in your fandoms, to enjoy it and feel safe and comfortable, to exchange and hang out. And we had a patio out there, and we would do geek meets and stuff like that, and you could just be in the comic book space, getting your favorite comics, where you could get your Supermans and your Batmans and stuff like that. But what you saw when you walk in, what you see is T'Challa, Sam, Black Cotton is a book series that's out there right now. Bitterroot, like the people that you see faced out are your Black and brown characters.
Right.
And you just have to dig in the crates if you're looking for the white folks. But the goal was to have a place where you felt represented when you walked in, and the motto of the shop is for the comics, for the culture, which is, like, we want you to understand the vibe when it came in, because Houston is a space town with NASA and everything like that. Cosmos is part of why, part of the story that we tell about the shop is in the infinite cosmos, whether you're a Black human or a green Martian Manhunter or a red Hulk, or something like that. Like, you have a place, there is a place, we're all interconnected in the cosmos. And so that's why, and it's obviously we're in the Gulf Coast. So that's why we're Gulf Coast Cosmos. And, it's as it grows, or if it grows, eventually I was meant to take on and go to another location to open, because it's really hard to have two owners in one space and have to pay both of our salaries, which is part of the reason why I transitioned out after 2.5 years. But it was meant to spread eventually, and maybe it still will. But obviously, with me leaving, I'm no longer going to be the reason why it moves to different places, because my business partner is very much from Houston, ride or die, will be in the 713 forever. They have left and come back, and they're like, Houston's home. So for now, Gulf Coast Cosmos is a Gulf Coast.
Yeah. Okay.
Space.
Okay. All right. And okay, so what other opportunities are out there for you entrepreneurially, since you no longer are co-owner of Gulf Coast Cosmos?
So I started ManeHustle Media back in 2018 when I started my shows, and ultimately that was always the goal, was to be able to produce POC-based content, created content. Right now, it's all my content, for the most part, that I'm doing. But I have produced other people's shows from time to time. Black Radical Queer, hosted by Javi and Nicole. I used to be under the ManeHustle Media banner, but that show is kind of on hiatus, so we haven't figured out quite the whole future for it. And then I'm starting another show with someone else soon too. That's a travel-based show. But the goal will be eventually for it to grow into its own podcast network studio space, in which I can assist in the education and creation of podcasts for POC folks, to try to find more affordable ways in which they can access the technology, and honestly just teach people how to do what it is that we do. And in addition to that, just also be the podcast network for all the shows that I do. And, if in the future I start to produce more shows, they would be also on that banner. So ManeHustle Media Studios is something that is in my future. I have a version of it in my head. I'm waiting to see how it plays out. Why it encouraged me to leave the shop after 2.5 years of doing it is that I had won a second award for Militantly Mixed, and because of the specific award that I won, which was Best Asian Stories culture and experiences for the Golden Crane Awards. I was acknowledged by an Asian American Podcasting Association. First of all, never been acknowledged as Asian before. This is the first time that ever happened, and the second time I've received 2 awards from them, and this one in particular got me on people's radar, and so I started becoming invited to participate in various things. Some are still in progress that I can't talk about, and some fell through and I can't talk about. But there was a TV thing that had fallen through that was supposed to take place around May and June, and then there's a number of articles that are coming out over the next couple months about Black Asian solidarity work, because I do a lot of activism in the Black Asian solidarity space, and I would get a message that would say, like, could you be in New York on this and this date? Could you be in LA on this and this date? And while I was a 40% owner of Gulf Coast, that was the plan, that I was still going to be predominantly doing ManeHustle Media.
Right.
That once we finally physically opened the shop, it was like, obviously all hands on deck are really important, but I wanted to be able to jump when I needed to jump for these opportunities. And so it started to shorten my time. As these things were coming up, it's like, all right, I think maybe I'll only be here for another 2 more years. And then it was like, it looks like 1 more year. And then it was like 6 more months, and then 3 more months. So that was kind of what happened. It was the opportunities were presenting themselves. The shop was doing well enough to sustain itself, but not to pay both of us.
Right.
And ultimately, while we had that in the plan originally, what we didn't have in the plan was the pandemic. So much of how we had to structure changed in the first 2 years of doing the shop, that in doing that, it also kind of changed the path for me too. We didn't anticipate when we signed the papers on creating this company together that a pandemic was coming and was going to shift how everything played out. And so now I try to live a very mobile life so that I can leave when I need to. And I mean, from the day I left the shop, which was March 26th, was my going away party. March 27th, I was on a plane to LA to do one of the first of those things that were happening. And since then, I've been away from the shop now for April, May, and June, and half of July. I have traveled. I have participated in a couple different film things and some articles and things like that, all of which are playing out later in the year. And it feels right, but I live 3 blocks away from the shop. So that also feels sad, to be this close to this thing that was such a big goal of my life to do. And I mean, I did it. I feel an aspect of completion in that the things I was hoping to create were created. I just didn't know that, like, I would move here and within 8 months pivot again. But I'm really proud of what is happening with ManeHustle Media. I can't talk about most of it, which is ridiculous, until things are ready to release. But there's been some great opportunities. And then in terms of the comic book element of it, because I owned a shop and because I have BLERDcoMIXed, I am going to be a panelist and or moderator at multiple cons this year. And it's just like, like finally this extra validation that, like, being a nerd is a thing and I can exist in this space, and hopefully achieve levels like the Blurred Girl or Fantastic Frankie, and really start to be present in bigger aspects of nerdery.
Well, in knowing you for the few years that I have, I can actually honestly say to you, I'm so glad that being unapologetically you is finally being celebrated in the way it always should have been all along.
Thanks.
And I'm so happy that you have all these opportunities coming. And I wish you could tell me a couple of them, but I totally understand. Being an entrepreneur myself, we have to be a light Lil Wayne. Real G's move in silence like lasagna. I understand.
Yeah. It's so crazy too, because there's like some things that I just want to, like, the second I found out about, I'm like, and it's like, wait, because you're gonna tell somebody and then it's gonna fall through, which is what happened with the TV thing. Luckily I didn't tell people. I told people there was a TV thing, That's what I told people.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't specifically say what it was for. And, hopefully they'll bring the idea back at some point, but it would have been amazing had they done it. And I'm still looking forward to those kind of opportunities, because I think not just the physical voices of us, Black and brown people in podcasting or anything like that. I think it's also important to see us as much as possible and see the diversity within us, skin tones, hair textures, facial structures, like things like that, to see like how broad a group we are. So hopefully some of the TV stuff ends up happening.
Yeah. Well, I get the feeling that it will for you, probably sooner rather than later. And look, all I have to say is come on back when it does pop off, because I will roll out the red carpet and have you sit and you can talk all about it. I'll just sit back. I'll ask questions, sit back, and you can talk as long as you want about it.
And I can talk. That's why I have 4 podcasts.
Oh my gosh. Well, definitely you have brought to light a lot of things, and just keep on shining. Just keep on shining. Podcaster, podcast producer, entrepreneur, and the CEO of ManeHustle Incorporated, Sharmane Fury. She has joined me on Revelations, and now it is time for plug tuning. Just like the song from De La Soul. This is
my
where
heart immediately. De La Soul is my group.
Mine too. This is where the person who is the guest gets a chance to plug whatever he or she desires. So, Sharmane, where can people find you?
So I describe myself as the busiest mixed race, bigendered, bisexual, polyamorous, atheist, comic book nerd, cat mom, and 2-time Asian American Podcasters Association's Golden Crane Award winning podcaster. In this podcasting game, I am the CEO and founder of ManeHustle Media and the host and or co-host of Militantly Mixed, BLERDcoMIXed, BLERDcoMIXed, BiFurious, and an upcoming travel show called Queer and Far. All of those handles, exactly how they're written out and spelled, are the same on all the social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I have a TikTok for Militantly Mixed that I'm barely just getting into. And what else? Yeah, I mean, if you're at Comic Palooza in Houston, Texas in July, I'll be on a couple panels there, Melanin on the mic, and podcasting is for the Blurds. If you're in attendance at Calexicon in August, I will be there moderating panels as well, waiting for my assignments, and I will be present at Dragon Con and New York Comic Con as an attendee and a cosplayer. So hunt me down.
Ooh, you are a busy woman. Goodness gracious. Podcaster extraordinaire. Podcast producer extraordinaire. Entrepreneur and the CEO of Hustle Maine Incorporated, Sharmane Fury. Thank you, Sharmane. I appreciate this time that I have shared with you.
Thanks for having me, Cole. I appreciate it. You got me in drag.
Many thanks to Sharmane Fury for giving us her perspective on life. And why don't you join us every Tuesday on YouTube, where you will see a different person like Sharmane interviewed each week. For changing the world, one conversation at a time, I'm Cole Johnson, and this has been Revelations. Thank you for tuning into Revelations. To download this episode, go to Acast and type Revelations. For apparel, go to Spring and type Revelations. Music by
Lakey Inspired.